Hello there, folks. Right, thank you very much for taking the time out of your day. I appreciate this is an incredibly difficult start to a brand new year. I will try not to use all the buzzwords that are buzzing around the industry at the moment, but thank you for taking the time once again for joining in the session. Now, today we're going to be taking a look at a digital transformation challenges, and this is part of a mini series of 6 sessions. So we won't cover necessarily everything from the whole series in this one. We certainly won't cover all the answers that you might have to your questions around digital transformation, but these sessions are designed to give you a bit of a talking point and a few concepts and ideas and things to think over around your own digital transformation initiatives. So just to introduce myself and get started, my name is Anthony Martin, and I am the Digital Innovations and Engagement Manager here at Exeter College. And in just a second, as we go through the presentation, I will bring on the video just so you can see me alongside what we're going through today. Also to let you know, we have Rachel Hibbard, who is in my team as well on the call today. So she will be there manning the questions and answer sections. So if any of you do have any questions as we go through about anything you've seen in the session, or general questions about our support and offerings through the EdTech demo program, then please feel free to pop a question in the chat and we will do our best to answer that. We will allow some time at the end of the session as well to go through any questions and answers that may be more useful for the whole group. So do continue to feed those and we will certainly try and get those as we round up this session today. So let's just put a video onto here, bring on my video feed. And we'll jump right in. Okay, so hopefully you've made it along to the right session. This is the one you're intending to jump in on. This is effectively going through digital transformation challenges, and the topic today is on innovation. The other topics we have in this series as well are around our general digital transformation skills, around time and resources, around fear and confidence, communications, and also then those concepts around AI, automation, standardization, and efficiencies, the kind of the sweet spot really of what digital transformation has been heralding and promising us for some time. Today's session is innovation, and in this one I'd like to touch on some of the key areas around the concepts of innovation, why digital transformation is important at all. We'll touch on, but not necessarily show a lot of the stuff around, or some of the stuff around the classrooms of the future and kind of where that fits in. We'll look at the kind of in its infancy or its fledgling status, the kind of Exeter College digital strategy or how it's forming, and also starts a discussion piece around the Microsoft Education Transformation Framework, which has been the baseline for a lot of the stuff that we've been doing here at the college. So the challenges that I think are most prominent and the ones we're going to cover off today are really around these 4 here. It's around perception, around message, around direction, and around adoption, effectively in this case of digital technologies. So what is innovation? And I've quite deliberately thrown up the surfer picture here, and I'll come on to that a little bit later on. But the surfer there, really, this idea of innovation is around the idea of horizon scanning, the idea of riding the wave of change. It's really that out in the lead, you're really going for it and sort of trying to embrace these new ideas, new technologies, and new concepts. But innovation is looked at as many, many different things. So if we take a quick tour of some of those, you might think of innovation, in effect, as being perhaps it's about something being bigger or better or faster or stronger than a previous iteration or previous product. Ultimately, that is the equivalent of our innovation. It's a little bit more nuanced than that, and these phrases could just as easily relate to it being smaller, it being lighter, it being cheaper or brighter. So realistically, innovation is that attainment of something that is improved in some way, shape or form compared to a previous version. In terms of education, that manifests itself in many different ways, and I think it's very easy for we as leaders of schools and colleges, and sort of in my case around IT teams, to look at this place of innovation and technology in the marketplace. as being about having the latest, the newest, the shiniest bit of kit, having the most up-to-date devices, having more of an IT suite, more of this technology in place. The key thing I'd like to stress is that innovation and digital transformation generally is not specifically about having those items. It's not about the new stuff. It's about how you use all of those pieces of technology, how you combine them with your processes, with your services, how you embrace and utilize change to deliver those better outcomes. So it's really not about visiting the trade shows, about laying down an order for the latest devices for your classrooms. It's as much about how you actually bring those into place and the impact and the benefit they have. So in some ways, I consider innovation to be a lot like evolution as a concept. So realistically here we have the concepts in evolution of things like marginal gains, of mutation, of dead ends, and the concepts of surviving and thriving. Now, when we look at that from an innovation point of view, our marginal gains are our iterative design. They're the things that we build upon, we continually improve, we add a little bit at a time to continue to improve that scenario, that solution, or that service that we might offer. Now, there's also then this concept of mutation. These are the discoveries, the eureka moments. These are the things that really may come as a surprise. They're something that you probably stumble upon much more. They are the hitting the ball out of the park type solutions and aspects that you encounter. Dead ends, these happen all the time. They happen in the evolutionary sense a lot of the time. We also see them in innovation. Now, these are the idea of being led down the garden path and hopefully not losing your map to how to get back. But it's really about this idea that not every idea, not every change leads to an innovation. There are dead ends, and this is what we fundamentally term as our research and development piece. This is the trial, the tribulation, the testing, and that recurring sort of design process to ultimately arrive at the goals. So we don't always get it right first time. Dead ends, in my view, around innovation really center around this idea of fail fast. If you're going to fail, understand what the remit is, understand what's the indicators of that are, do it, learn from it, move on, try the next thing. And then the ultimate aim of either innovation or evolution, really in this sense, is actually to survive and to thrive. And those are the two kind of areas that I think are probably most poignant to take away from this. Now, in terms of what the actual definition says, if we take a quick look around Wikipedia or various other sites, there are many definitions of this, but this is probably the best one I could pick out on this topic. So innovation is the multi-stage process whereby organizations transform ideas into new or improved products, services, or processes in order to advance, compete, and differentiate themselves successfully in their marketplace. Well, that was a bit of a mouthful, I think, wasn't it? That was certainly a lot to get through. Yeah, that's absolutely true. That's absolutely right. That is, in a nutshell, I think, how most of us would regard innovation. And most of us would regard it as generally being a pretty positive and pretty good thing. We might even consider it to be a sensible idea, particularly if we want to remain relevant and we want to continue to be relevant in what it is that we're doing and to continue to offer the best, in our cases, education that we can to our learners. So this brings me to probably our first challenge, and that is one of perception. In terms of perceptions, it's quite important to say that innovation and change is not always looked on in a positive light. Sometimes it can entice a concept of fear, and that is something that I'll cover in a later part of this series. But quite interestingly, again, you can find the story on Wikipedia. Again, in its own right is a huge innovation. This is an idea that historically innovations were really not seen in a positive light at all. Kings and queens would issue declarations against innovation, and you could also find that you would have your ears chopped off if you were accused of innovating in any way, shape, or form. Now, thankfully, I think the world has moved on a little bit, and I feel a little bit safer in my own role now. In that sense, we have moved on from the 1400s, and I think it is now looked upon in a slightly different way. But this kind of fear is very true. I think before COVID, it was very clear to see There were reluctances around change, in particular things that you've seen very recently. Lecture capture was seen as a threat by many teaching staff. It was considered a threat from the point of view that it would do away with teachers' jobs, that if you've pre-recorded something, you have no need to then deliver it. I think we've proven that is very much the opposite way, and very much a different case now in this scenario. Also, again, coming from COVID, we had this idea of standardized content approaches. The fear previously was that would remove creativity, it would remove individualization and differentiation of material. But actually, in this set of circumstances, it's been essential to limiting our workloads. It's been essential to removing those additional pressures on staff, or trying to, during this lockdown, and also to ensuring that we have consistent and quality approaches to our lesson delivery. So it is very much a force for good, I think, and it's something that we should be embracing. So that's the first challenge. Challenge number 2 in my mind here is about hearing the message, and this is often something with change that we miss, and it's quite important, I think, here to really listen to those voices within your organizations, to hear and more importantly understand what it is that's being said. I've put a few points here. I think it's quite important to recognize that the right direction, or the approach you should take, doesn't necessarily come from those who are shouting the loudest. It doesn't necessarily come from some of your survey responses, and I've seen this in surveys that I've put out myself very recently. It can give you a very polarized view. Unless you have a 100% sort of sign-in rate to that, there is quite I think a high likelihood that you'll have a polarized view where you're getting the views of those who either want to comment very positively about something, or some want to comment very negatively about something. It doesn't necessarily address that part in the middle with your silent majority, those who go along with the status quo. And we'll look at that in a moment when we look at the innovation curve and how we embrace and roll out change. And also fundamentally in this listening part, are you asking the right questions? So it's very easy to look at this in the sense of understanding skills, for instance. If your transformation agenda is to address digital skills, then are you going to be doing that by asking people what they need training in? That's certainly one way. Now, if I went out to our team members and I asked them if they need training in Excel, or if they know Excel, most of them will probably come back and tell me they do. However, it's the way I frame that question. It's, have I set the right baselines? Have I got them to answer the parts? Do they understand the parts of Excel, for instance, that I need them to understand as part of their role and part of their remit? So that leads us on to using services like the digital insights tool from JISC. Now, this is something we've looked at initially, and it's something that I'd like to revisit and bring into our own program. Fundamentally, you don't know what you don't know. So we have a series of Art of the Possible sessions, and we have some of those running as part of this program as well, that offer some inspiration and insight into the different things that you could achieve. And then knowing that, you can address the skills need, you can address the parts that you actually need to do off the back of that. And also it's finding out the information, as we said earlier on, from things like the BET conferences, like Digital Futures, and those various shows and events that take place. So carrying that on, and this is why the Surfer was important from earlier on. This is something that's always accidentally reminds me. I don't think our vice principal will mind me mentioning this, but on his whiteboard, he has drawn a very nice picture of me. It's not quite as good as this one, I'll say, and I'm probably going to get shot down about that later on. But it includes a surfer riding the wave, effectively, and it's a bit of a reminder to me as an innovator that we are trying to push things. We have this agenda to drive change. But also we have an importance to listen to those other voices and to consider the capacity for change, the appetite for change within an organization as well, and to make sure that we do this and we innovate in a supportive way, and that we don't push too much against this, because that can cause us other problems down the line. And that's something that I'll touch on in our fear and confidence piece. So really important here to listen to what you're being told, to use your data effectively, to use your surveys and to analyze the information coming out from that. One of the other fundamental points here as well is where we have an aversion to change, aversion to innovation. It's important to remember that even though many of the comments we have back about this are that we've always done it that way, so we will continue to do it that way. It's certainly an argument I've heard in many roles in the past. And it's a little bit like that 1400s history lesson that we've just gone through. For an innovator, it's a little bit like having your ears cut off in a sense, because in reality, as an organization, you haven't actually always done it that way. There was a time before this where you either didn't do it at all, or you did it slightly differently. It's just that it's fallen out of memory and it's fallen out of that change process. It had to start somewhere, and you've always made those decisions and those changes. Interestingly, I want to just draw on a point here from Blockbuster, which is something again we cover in later sessions. Blockbuster, the video rental store, obviously a very big story about it going bust many years ago, and that was, I think, widely regarded now as a response to, or in response to, not embracing change and the opportunities that lay down in front of them. Jeff Bezos, also CEO of Amazon, has also stated to his employees that one day Amazon will fail. So that's quite an important lesson to come out from someone in such a high position in a company that is actually relatively new and in its relatively early days, I think, in lifespan. But there are some amazing pieces, and there's a story that I'm happy to share with anyone afterwards around that side that is quite telling as well. Okay, so it brings me on to our next challenge about direction. Where on earth do we start with this whole digital transformation piece? There's so much that we can cover. There are so many different tracks. There's so many resources being offered out on the web at the moment. Where on earth do we start with all of that? And that is very much a big challenge. It's certainly one we faced. I started here with this education transformation framework, effectively. So in the image on the left-hand side there, you'll see the 4 pillars of what Microsoft have put together in their concepts around the transformation program. So where do you start? I think looking to that particular program is a good place to consider that. I think it's really important to say that your transformation will be very much unique to you and your institution. It will not necessarily look anything like what we have done within the college here or within any other school or institution. So it's very much unique to you, and I think it's important that you make it unique to you as well. This has to be your journey, not a copy of somebody else's. And I think that is probably one of the overriding parts to consider in your own digital transformation. It's important to consider how you will manage that change. And also, probably more importantly, how will you understand that you've been successful in any transformation agenda? What are your aims? What are your objectives? What are the outcomes likely to look like? And also to remember that these ideas are all interconnected with one another. And that is quite telling in kind of how we've embraced the education transformation framework. So it does form part of our kind of strategy and development at the moment. And it forms a little bit of a golden thread that we've recognized all of these pillars, all these concepts run through effectively everything we do, and certainly everything we've been doing since COVID. And that's sort of why we've got that sort of golden thread going. Now, what it looks like when we get these ideas down to paper, and actually the scale of this is something a little bit different and can seem a little bit daunting. This is our tube map, effectively, and it maps out a lot of those interconnecting lines from the framework. It looks at leadership and policy, our green line, our technology blueprints, the blue line, modern teaching and learning, which is one of our purple lines, and then intelligent environments as our orange line. And these are all different aspects of that program mapped out to show how they interrelate to one another and how these programs are dependent on the work of all the teams within our organization. And in terms of the actual strategy itself, this is kind of a mock-up of where I see our digital transformation strategy fitting within this. So there is ultimately the college objective, the set of college objectives in the core strategy or the college strategy. Underneath that, we have our underpinning core strategies around teaching and learning strategy and our digital transformation. Our pillar strategies are ones that would support, so these are individual faculties or departments and how they're going about their message, and underpinned, of course, by our governance, compliance and regulation aspects. So all of these factors have to be considered in anything we put together around this innovation and transformation piece. So then we move on to our next challenge, which is driving adoption. And it's worth mentioning at this point something that I think is quite important, and this is the innovation curve or the innovation adoption life cycle. The most interesting thing about this is that it actually came from agricultural research and had nothing at all to do with digital and had nothing at all to do with education. I suppose you could say the innovation, of course, is that it's being used in now education settings and every industry probably since it was conceptualized in 1957. Realistically, it looks a little more like this. There is a gap between the early adoption stage and the early majority stage. There's a chasm, and that's the part that we try and overcome to allow us to continue all of the rest of our innovation program. So this is one of the most fundamental challenges that I face, my teams face, and anyone working in research, development, and innovation will find this. That's the challenge. That's the chasm we've got to jump. The innovators and early adopters are quite easy to get to. They're the ones who want to embrace these changes. The early majority are more likely to be a little bit conservative about their approach. They will be open to new ideas, and they will influence their neighbours once they're on board, but there's a little bit more work involved in getting them to that stage. And then we have our late majority. Now, I will point out here the commentary that's been added here is in relation to the 1957 study or publication, and it is in relation to farming aspects. So where I talk about education, I must stress that I actually don't subscribe to the kind of views that someone is less or more educated depending on where they fall on this scale. It was really, I think, envisaged that those people had access to or has the knowledge of the opportunity set out before them. So in my view, it's where our art of the possible type sessions come into play. So I hope that doesn't cause any offence to anyone looking at that slide and thinking, oh, hang on a minute, that's not very fair. I would probably say I very much agree with you in the use of language, but I thought it was important to show it as it was. So when we're appealing to our late majority, we're really trying to get the message out there. It's a lot more push to share the message. These people are generally sort of less involved in the community aspect and the social aspects around the technology. So getting the message out there can fall to traditional methods often in these cases. And then we have our laggards at the very end. These are the ones, when we talk about the farming aspects, obviously, they were the smaller farms, they had less capital, they were perhaps older generation, and I think, again, unfairly so here, least educated, but perhaps had less opportunity, I think was the way I would look at that. Those are the most difficult ones to address, and they are really the latter part of your critical mass. It's that hump in the middle that I think is the key one to try and aim for. Everybody else will hopefully follow along with that, even if dutifully from the laggard point of view. So how do we drive that adoption? What do we actually do? How do we get over that chasm, and how do we implement our plans and our strategies? Difficult. I don't really have any answers necessarily to those questions in your specific cases, but certainly have to explore them with you as part of our work with the EdTech demo program. Really around adoption is implementing your transformation. It's around moving with the majority or trying to push the majority. In my mind, kind of how I look on this is it's a little bit more like spinning plates than it is around a carefully defined process that you can follow. I think it's important to have the detail. I think it's really important to be able to follow along with these processes, but you won't necessarily be able to move in that way because of the interrelated nature of a lot of this digital transformation piece, how it impacts our schools and colleges, how it has so many tie-ins to different areas of our business. It will mean you are moving between those plates and trying to keep them spinning and move together as a mass. I think in this, that's the approach that I think I've tried to take So how does that work for us at the college? We have done this in the form of effectively our teams working much more closely together. So we have effectively a holy trinity, I suppose, in terms of our IT, our innovation, and our learning media teams. That is further supported by tie-ins to our teaching and learning teams. So TLP, our teaching and learning, consists of our learning media support, our number of advanced digital practitioners, who are those on the ground offering support to tutors, and of course my team in innovations here as well. On the other side of that, we have our ICT team, which I'm also a part of, and that forms or is embedded within our estates and IT division within the college. And that is quite important when you look back to the education transformation framework again, because it allows that tie-in between the buildings, the intelligent environments, and the IT piece. So it ties those back together again. Of course, we have our learning resource centres as well, and these are really around supporting that digital agenda and support for our students and student effort. And then, of course, underpinning a lot of that, we have our MIS teams, who are, of course, supporting the core systems, the data, the analytics, the enrollments, and student database effectively and program. So all of that is important and integral to everything else that we do. So it gives a little bit of an idea about the shape of the college and the kind of things and the structure of our team we've tried to put together. And that actually brings me to a close. It is a very short session today. It is only half an hour. I wanted to try and keep that to as close to half an hour as I can do, and leave you enough time for any questions at the end. So a few takeaways from this one. I think the key things that I would say are important to consider with your venture into innovation and digital transformation. I'll start with your strategy. You know, really map out what it is that you expect. What are your aims? What are your aspirations? What do your students expect of you and the college or the school? I think it's worth borrowing or using in its entirety, but certainly borrowing parts from the education transformation framework. Equally, there are similar resources available from JISC and a number of other institutions as well, where they are trying to assist and help with that transformation piece. You may not necessarily want to use all of it, but I think there are lots and lots of takeaways from those sets of documents and schemes and support sessions that are very worth taking away. The other thing I'd say is, and I see this a lot, I wouldn't say necessarily in the college, but I've seen this a lot in many other industries, is really do consider the support and professional services teams within your institutions. It's quite easy to go to some of these shows, seminars, conferences, come back with a whole stack of great ideas, to find that they're more difficult to implement than you thought. I think it's really important to consider the professional development that your own teams have gone through, the knowledge and understanding that you have within your own institutions already. It would be silly not to take advantage of that in many cases, and I think it's really important to involve them in the conversation as stakeholders for the change that you might want to sort of instigate. So do involve them, do consider it, and finally on this part, really do consider the scale of what you're trying to achieve. Everything we've talked about today is just a very high level view of some of those ideas and concepts. It would be very easy to look at this as being too big, too complex. There's too much change, particularly when you start looking at whole frameworks. I think the key thing I can say is persevere. Rome wasn't built on a day. You will be able to do these things. I think it's just considering how fast and how quickly you can do that, and also what is important to you. As I mentioned earlier on, every single institution's journey is going to be different, and I think you have to define what it is that you're trying to achieve out of this. Some of you have already started down that road. Some of you will be just getting started. You don't have to do everything, and you don't have to do everything that everybody else is doing. Look at your own particular journey and needs in this. So from me, the kind of final piece I'd like to finish on is we started with a definition from innovations and what innovation is. Having gone through this session, I don't know whether it's changed your viewpoint a little bit on your own thoughts, but I just wanted to share with you what I actually think innovations is. In my humble opinion, I suppose, innovations is looking back from a better position on a decision to not stand still. So by that, I think I mean that you only realize you've innovated or that you have attained an innovation once you can realize the benefits of it. Until you have those benefits, until it's actually made an impact, a positive impact, I think we can all agree is what an innovation should do. Until that point, it's basically just a change. And until that change has given a positive outcome, until you've started that change even, it's just an idea. So innovation is a bit of a retrospective look at your approaches, I think. So I hope you found that useful. Thank you once again for tuning into the session. Please do fire any questions that you have for us over into the chat window. Rachel and I will be here to answer those. We'll hang around for the next 15 minutes or so. What I would say is also off the back of taking part in this, we would ask that you take part in the EdTech demo program. Obviously, one of the reasons we can continue to offer these sessions is because of that program itself. So if we could ask you, if you are taking part in this, to complete either a request for support if you'd like further support, or at the very least the project initiation document to tell us a little bit more about your institutions and the support needs that you have. Even if you want to state on there that you just want to come along and attend some of our webinar and training sessions, please do fill it in. It is the primary reason that we're able to offer these sessions at all. So I'll leave that with you, but thank you all very much. And I hope you found some of that insightful.